You laugh, okay, but I'm like a brand guy. I think it's a brilliant idea, okay? The fact that he made the mistake twice, I understand, not just tonight, but also at convocation, you have to go with the desired line. In all seriousness. So you can't have a UATX with a UT Austin and then we recruit away, someone to become the new head of Austin University. And by the way, we need to do this before our merch is everywhere, right? We should create some amazing merch, Austin University, and we're done. And by the way, fundraising will skyrocket. Yes.
So
and by the way, we will no longer sound like a railroad.
I was afraid you were going to suggest we call it Ackman University. So I'm kind of relieved at this point. One of the funny things about naming is, as you say, the desire line tends to dominate. I once wrote a book called The Square and the Tower. It is always referred to as the Tower and the Square. Nothing I can do about it. I've experienced this before. I was called Niall Ferguson until people started calling me Niall Ferguson. Are you suggesting I should just surrender to the desire line of Niall? But the funny thing is that, Bill, you're right. It can be Austin University or it can be the University of Austin, just as it's Oxford University or the University of Oxford. I don't mind as long as we're mentioned in the same breath as Oxford. And, when you were starting out Pershing Square, what was the origin of that name? Where did your business name come from? Was there a desire line there?
Yes. My first office for my first fund was at 110 East 42nd Street, which is Grand Central Station. I'll give a 2-second story on this. And the square in front of Grand Central, before Grand Central, was called Pershing Square. And actually, there's a restaurant, called Pershing Square, that we used to eat at kind of every day when I was at my old sort of company. And then when I launched my new firm, and then I did a little research on General Pershing, so-called Blackjack Pershing, who was a very brave...
I wondered about that.
...general. And so I thought, courage, obviously, bravery, and then there was a desired line, and I could show you the original floor plan. But now, the fun part of this is I was raising money for Pershing Square, and I had met with Mort Zuckerman, real estate entrepreneur, as I'm trying to gather the capital, and I had a pretty good meeting with him, and a few days later, I'm having breakfast at the Pershing Square restaurant. And the hostess comes over to the table and she said, are you Mr. Ackman? I said, yes. There's someone calling you. And basically, Mort Zuckerman's secretary looked up Pershing Square in the phone book and she called the restaurant, which is basically a diner, and I happened to be there at the time. Ultimately, he chose not to invest.
That's because he thought you were running a restaurant. So brand confusion is easy, but this gives me the segue into an opening question. I can't have you here on stage with this great crowd of supporters without asking you about the trade war. You just went out on X a couple of days ago saying we need to pause the US-China trade war. Tell me exactly why you think that's a good idea.
My theory is as follows. 145% tariffs are basically a complete shutdown in trade with China. The repercussions for US businesses, beginning with small US businesses that source any meaningful amount of their product from China, it is pretty much decimation. They will, they cannot mark up, think the toy retailer in Austin, buying goods for Christmas. They're done. And when you go to war, it's very important, and trade war or other war, that economically you are as powerful as you can possibly be. And this tariff actually threatens us economically and the uncertainty. And by the way, it's not just small businesses. It's medium-sized businesses, it's large businesses. It's a bit like COVID, except the Hilton survived COVID, but the guy who owned one hotel, absent the government stepping in and lending money, he was toast. And so my argument is Trump has made his point that the U.S. is going to be fierce about negotiating for various strategic and economic and other reasons. And he's accomplished that already. But what's interesting is if you take the tariffs down from 145% to 20% against China, then the ball is now the ball's in China's court. And what I mean by that is every CEO of every business that sources in China right now is desperately trying to find another alternative, move their supply chains. That's not going to change when you take tariffs from 145 to 20. They're going to be that much more motivated to do so. The longer that China takes to negotiate make a deal with the president, the higher the probability that every business leaves China on a fairly permanent kind of basis. So I think it actually, by lowering the tariffs, it makes time our friend in the negotiation and time China's enemy. Whereas right now, I think it's really the enemy of both. What's sort of fascinating about this is when we take them down, it becomes, now we have the staying power because the 10 or 20% tariff is manageable for nearly all businesses.
So when you were talking with the president about the need for the 90-day pause in the reciprocal tariffs, one argument that you could make, which was pretty compelling, was that the bond market was about to blow up. And there was this very unusual combination of a weakening dollar and rising 10-year yields. Is there an equally compelling economic argument that you can make now about the US-China tariffs, and what would it be?
The argument would be that the market is expecting a pause, in effect.
And if it doesn't get one?
It's going to be ugly. And again, you don't want to go to war. I mean, the ultimate bellwether of the U.S. economy is the stock market. You don't want to go to war with the stock market declining, with bond yields, the bond market declining, and the dollar weakening. That's a weak negotiating position, and will be perceived that way. And as we approach midterm elections, we want to stay very far away from kind of the midterms for this to be resolved, because certainly the president will lose a lot of his power in that circumstance.
Do you see how I'm getting you all free investment advice? I get one more question in this direction. There are some economists, I'm thinking of the guy at Apollo, who really think a recession is now inevitable, whatever happens, because there's so much trade policy uncertainty that even if the president takes your advice and there's a pause or they lower the tariffs on China, it's still going to happen because the shock has been administered. How do you think about that chain reaction? When do we get from financial markets being unhappy or confidence indicators moving to the real economy feeling it? How do you think about that chain reaction?
So business fundamentally is a confidence game, right? If you're not confident in the future, every decision a CEO makes is based on a prediction about the future. To the extent the future becomes uncertain, what do people do? Is they pause. And they don't hire the marginal person. They don't put the shovel in the ground to build the next factory. They just, the great wait is what they do. And I think, that is actually going on. I think the second quarter is going to be meaningfully weaker than Q1. Q1 had the benefit of a lot of front-loaded purchases as people tried to get ahead of the tariffs, whether that's cars or flat screen, sort of TVs. Q2. The pause is sort of underway. I think the only thing mitigating it is that the markets are stable. Actually, markets are up, a bit since Trump. But that will fade very quickly as if we start getting closer to the 90-day pause without some meaningfully positive announcements with respect to the reciprocal tariffs. And I also think, with the China situation resolved, now China's already showing a little leg here, right? They've eliminated the tariffs on about $40 billion worth of trade. There's been some positive kind of language. The Chinese sent a delegation very secretly to meet with Treasury Besant, and they were caught by Korean media on the way into the Treasury building. So I think all of these things have caused the expectation to be we're going to pause and we're going to make progress. I think if we don't, then we're going to be back in the soup, which is where we were before.
We're here to talk about higher education more than about markets. You really were the most outspoken critic of Harvard University after October 7th, 2023. Now, the Trump administration is going after Harvard really hard. How do you react to that? Do you agree with the way the administration is dealing with Harvard? And can maybe I ask you for your comments about the report that just got published by Harvard on the problem of anti-Semitism on the campus?
So first, I owe the world an apology, which is I did not realize how sick higher education was or how bad things were until October 8th. So I feel like late to the party. I made up a bit. We kind of lost time. So the question is how Trump's managed. So the problem of the Harvards of the world is people think a $53 billion endowment, I don't want to use an untoward expression, it's sort of FU money, and it creates the opportunity for university independence, but it's not actually the case. Yesterday, I read the bond prospectus for Harvard's taxable $750 million bond issuance, and a few interesting facts. So number one, Harvard has a stated $53 billion endowment, of which 80 to 85% of the assets are in private equity, real estate, and venture capital. Yale's marketing a $6 billion slice of their private equity exposure, and I guarantee you that that's the carrying value. I guarantee you that the transaction price is going to be a meaningful reduction from that number, which should cause, appropriately from an accounting perspective, Yale to have to remark their entire portfolio, and it should cause Harvard to do the same thing. Harvard's marketing a $1 billion slice of their portfolio. So one thing I believe is that the private equity portfolios, the real estate portfolios, the venture capital portfolials are mismarked. And
What's meaningful?
I would say 40% discount.
40%.
Yeah. First of all, every institution is completely full up with private equity. No one wants incremental exposure to private equity. So the next buyer cost of capital is meaningfully higher. My guess is Yale chooses not to transact, and Harvard may do the same because they don't want to report the figure. But let's just talk about, so one, the assets are invested in illiquid funds where they can't get liquidity other than by doing a secondary transaction. And the scale of these secondary transactions, there isn't enough capital interested in buying them, absent massive discounts. But it tells you what the concerns are. You say, well, how could Harvard have a problem? One, they have $53 billion endowment, which is mismarked. By the way, the marks are basically, the venture capital marks are as of the last round, which were done in probably 2021 for many of these businesses. The real estate marks were done before the Fed started kind of raising interest rates, and really the same, for private equity. So how has Harvard been meeting its obligations? They've been issuing debt. What's not talked about when you mention the $53 billion endowment is Harvard has $7.9 billion worth of debt. The most recent issuance was for a AAA rated institution, was in the 5% range. I mean, this is not a kind of a low sort of coupon. Now imagine you're a donor who's being cultivated by Harvard to give money. Well, where's your money going? It goes to Harvard and it goes out the door to pay interest expense to bondholders. My experience with charity or nonprofits that have large amounts of debt, it's a death spiral because the donor doesn't want to give money that they want to give to a project they don't want to give to kind of pay interest expense. Harvard relies on the federal government, on the alums, donations, and a very small liquidity pool to meet their kind of ongoing obligations, and a draw from the endowment. And each of these has been meaningfully impaired. Donors are not excited to give money to the university, and they're going to be less excited once they understand what's the financial picture. The tax exemption is at risk, which means that tax exemption benefits the institution because they get they don't have to pay taxes, but I would say more significantly, the donor gets the benefit of a meaningful tax deduction in America when we give to these institutions. That goes away. I mean, it's a disaster. So they're under, I would say, quite severe financial pressure. Now, if you read, there were two letters from the administration. There was one on April 7th, and there was a mistaken one, supposedly on April 13th. They both basically said the same thing. The first was actually quite fair. The second, I would call it a bit, what you might call overreaching. But the university has continued to mismanage every element of their business. They mismanaged the endowment. They've let their administrative expense get completely out of control, and now they're mismanaging their relationship with the university. The wrong thing to do with President Trump is to escalate. Look at what happened with China, where tariffs are. We're now in we're in DEFCON, whatever, 3, with respect to Harvard. So what did Harvard do? They just they didn't acknowledge anything that was correct in the letter from the administration, and then they turned around and they said definitively no, and then they sued the administration. My view is, and I think this is the view of most Americans, is that the federal government giving taxpayer money to a university is a privilege and not a right. And so what did the Trump administration ask for? They said, look, you need to reduce your administrative bloat, okay? Because, by the way, money is fungible, and maybe we're funding science projects, but but effectively we're funding your overhead expense. And you need to bring your overhead expense down. You have to if you're going to take money from the taxpayers, we have to know that there's no waste. And there's massive, massive waste at Harvard. If you look at the compound annual, I did a little PowerPoint buy, sell, or hold on Harvard, which you can find out there. But if you look at the compound annual growth rate in administrative expense and FTEs, full-time equivalents of the administrators versus faculty, the admin expense goes up like this, and the faculty is basically flat. So it's, if you think about this as a business, it's a business where when I graduated from Harvard, there were 1,600 people in my class. And the business of Harvard is educating, that 1,600. Well, if you fast forward to today, the graduating class of 2024 had like 1,640 people in it. Okay, so the university grew 3% over 36 years. Can you tell me of any great business of which you are aware? By the way, that's not a 3% annual compound rate. That's a 3% rate. It's probably it's hard for me to do the math, but it's 0.0 something, 8% compounded annual growth over 40 years. So it's not, and think about the growth in the population over the period. Think about the percentage of foreign students that are going to Harvard now. So this institution, chartered, oldest corporation in America, to educate the future leaders of our country, is educating a tiny fraction of what it was chartered to do, kind of going back in time. And the federal funding to Harvard has continued to increase kind of over this sort of period of time. You've got a CEO who has very little control, i.e. the president, Alan Garber. He's got a workforce that he can't fire, tenure. He's got an endowment that has very little liquidity. And now he's just put himself in a horrible place vis-a-vis the administration, and he's at risk of losing the tax exemption. And so Harvard is in a very bad place. And what they should be doing is they should have immediately engaged with President Trump. We know that his strategy, negotiating strategy, is to ask for, get the headlines with a crazy ask, and then he wants to make a deal. And they should have said, you're right, President Trump, we're hiring Alex Partners, or a restructuring firm, and we're going to do a zero-based budget of what the administrative expense of Harvard should look like. We're going to restructure our organization. You're right, we've done a horrible job protecting students from hate and allowing pro-terrorist protesters to interfere with education, and we're going to stop it now, and we're going to enforce our code of conduct, which Harvard has not done. Story just in the last week, the member of the, not the faculty, what's the number, kind of the student, like a PhD who teaches students?
Teaching fellow?
Teaching fellow. So there's a teaching fellow that physically attacked a Harvard Business School Jewish student who was walking by the protest. He just got a $65,000 stipend to study something, and he was given a very light. His sentence was 80 hours of community service. So they're not enforcing the rules. I mean, they'll throw someone out of the university and suspend them on the basis of a few too many drinks at a party. So Trump asked for protect your students, eliminate waste, and improve viewpoint diversity at the university. These were the principal asks, and they're entirely reasonable, and it needs to happen, and the university just completely shut it down. So You can argue with President Trump's negotiating strategy. You can say he's over the top, but he's fundamentally right in what he's asking for. And I think the taxpayers should only be funding universities that don't waste money, that have true viewpoint diversity, and create environments that are not anti-Semitic or hate-filled environments.
Yeah, yeah. So Bill, I hear you're short Harvard, but you're long Austin University, because you generously...
With the name change, I'm super long. Yeah.
You generously pledged $10 million to support
Say
our
Austin
university.
University.ai, and then
Why are you long the renamed Austin University, apart from the renaming?
After this experience with Harvard, I thought, okay, my first reaction is let's try to fix Harvard. We begin with the worst government. I'm a retired activist investor, right? What did I do in my day job? I'd find a great business that lost its way. We'd try to engage with the board and management. If we were unsuccessful, we run a proxy contest, we put a new board in, we recruit new leadership, and we fix the company. Now let's look at Harvard. Harvard has a two-tier board structure. They've got 13 or 12 people in the so-called corporation board. There's no way to run a proxy contest. There's no way to propose a candidate. The corporation board elects itself. Crazy. They have a board of overseers that has about 32 members. They have 6-year terms. The slate is selected by the corporation board. If you want to run for the slate, you used to have to get 600 signatures. They changed that to 3,200 signatures after October 7th. And a couple of very capable alums ran to actually get on the ballot. And they did basically what the Democratic Party did during the most recent election, actually to candidates other than Biden. And they made it effectively impossible. You had to make like 13, you had to go through like 13 windows and call the development office to get your password in order to vote. And still, the leading group, there were 2 leading groups that got 3,100 signatures, 100 short from what was needed, and they didn't allow them on the ballot. So it's like the disastrous kind of, so I even forgot your question, but.
Why are you long? If you're short Harvard,
okay.
Because it's
so I started,
governance
can I fix Harvard? And I said, no, I can't fix Harvard. The only way to fix Harvard is severe financial pressure. And the good news is the administration is going to bring it on. And that's going to force change. And then I said, well, look, are there any universities doing the right thing? I actually watched one of Neil's fairly inspired speeches from maybe a dinner like this one on YouTube. And that got me interested. And then I came here and I met the students. And you get inspired when you meet a group of young people taking a risk, going to a startup university, because they don't want to repeat the experience they had in high school, where they couldn't say what they thought, where there was cancel culture, DEI, all these various kinds of problems, and they were super, super impressive. And I said, okay, we got to, sometimes the best thing to do is start with a blank sheet of paper. Big fan of the Constitution that was discussed tonight. And love to see this place be enormously successful and then replicate. One of the things we were talking about at dinner is why not have samples of some of the great classes being taught here, get a Hollywood-type producer, multiple cameras, and say, here's what real education looks like, and put these out on YouTube. I can help make them go viral. But ultimately, that's a great way to expand the educational progress. The biggest negative